So look at Anthony Ryder from South Lyon, Michigan, recently selected as the Lions 2020 Fan of the Year. He has a passion about sports broadcasting.
With the 112th selection in the 2021 NFL Draft, the Detroit Lions select Amon-Ra St. Brown, wide receiver, USC. One pride, baby! Yeah! It is officially time for the offseason. The Detroit Lions are no longer in the 2023 playoff race, meaning they have their eyes set on 2024. And over the next couple of months, we are going to talk extensively about how the Detroit Lions can make their roster better and make their roster more competitive for the 2024 season so that it ends a little more happy than the 2023 season. And with that being the case, we're going to talk a lot about the biggest needs on this Detroit Lions team, the weaknesses on this roster, and what needs to be addressed this offseason to turn the Lions' weaknesses into strengths and turn the Lions from a good football team into a great football team. So that's what we're going to take a look at today. We're going to take a look at the three biggest positions of need for the Detroit Lions this offseason and potential ways that the Detroit Lions can combat that and address the gaping holes on the roster. So with that being said, let's start off with what I think is potentially the smallest of these needs, but still very much a position of need for the offseason, that being the defensive line. Now, the defensive line for the Detroit Lions was not great last year. They ranked just 24th in sacks on the NFL, but they did rank number one in pressures, largely due to the 110 generated by Aiden Hutchinson. But nonetheless, their defensive line ranked number one in pressures across the entire NFL. Aiden Hutchinson was elite. Aleem McNeil was really good. Josh Pascal had some really good games. I think that James Houston flashed a little bit. Even guys like Benito Jones had a couple nice plays here and there. It was far from all bad on the Detroit Lions defensive line. But this offseason, a lot of that's going to change. Both the Okwara brothers, Romeo and Julian, are pending free agents, as is Charles Harris, as is edge rusher James Houston. Now, James Houston is an exclusive rights free agent, meaning if the Detroit Lions want to sign him back for the remaining 2 years of what would have been his rookie contract, they can very much do so, and there is pretty much no threat that another NFL team is going to take James Houston away. But that means going into 2024, the Lions defensive line, and particularly their edge rushing group, looks like Aiden Hutchinson, John Kaminsky, kind of, Josh Pascal, kind of, and James Houston. There's four players left on the edge rush rotation as you're losing three, if not four guys from that rotation this year. Now, the reason I say I don't necessarily think this is the biggest need for the Detroit Lions is because both the Okwara brothers as well as Charles Harris really weren't effective very much throughout the season. The Lions pretty much leaned very heavily on Aiden Hutchinson and Aleem McNeil and some of their interior guys like Josh Pascal and John Kaminsky. So I think even if the position isn't addressed super early, as long as they can upgrade over a guy like Charles Harris, who didn't record a TFL or didn't record a pressure since like week 6, if they can afford to, improve from Romeo Okwara, who had 1 sack this season and didn't have a pressure from like weeks 4 to 13 or something like that, if they can upgrade even a little bit with a mid-round guy, with a middle-of-the-tier free agent, I think that can really help the Detroit Lions, and I think it can make the defense significantly improved. But I don't think this is one of those positions where they necessarily have to spend big money, where they necessarily have to break the bank, because even if you run it back with a similarly talented defensive line, I think your defensive line coach is going to be better next year with Terrell Williams. And I think even if you get guys that produce relatively similar to Romeo and Julian Okwara, right, and Charles Harris, I think combined they went for 5 sacks as a trio, and you bring back James Houston, which is almost inevitable, I still think the Lions defensive line can be okay, even if there isn't a significant upgrade made to the pass rush and the rushing defense. Now, as I said, throughout free agency, there's a couple really nice guys. I think Shaquille Barrett is kind of a veteran option that could be really interesting. I know Bryce Huff from the Jets is potentially a free agent option, but obviously looking more towards the younger side, the side that Brad Holmes seems to excel at, you have guys like Dallas Turner in the draft, Latu, Jared Verse, Chop Robinson. I know Brandon Dorless from Oregon. I know Chris Braswell is really good from Alabama. Braylon Trice from Washington. Darius Robinson from Missouri. Adisi Asik from Penn State. There are probably 8 to 10 defensive linemen, 8 to 10 edge rushers that really could be super impactful for the Detroit Lions, even if they're not necessarily taken in the top 10, in the top 12, right? You have guys like Chop Robinson that could fall to the early 20s. You have guys like Braylon Dorless who could fall to the second round. Braylon Trice, Chris Braswell, Darius Robinson that you could get in the middle of the second round, even late into the second round, and still have a really good product to show for it. As I said last year, the Detroit Lions ranked 24th in sacks, but very top of the NFL in pressures. Aiden Hutchinson, I think, is an elite defensive lineman. Aleem McNeil, I think, is probably a top 10 defensive tackle in the NFL. James Houston is a super versatile and super dangerous pass rusher, but doesn't really bring a whole lot in the run defense. And I think Josh Pascal and John Kaminsky can be really good options as well, kind of floating from the interior to the edge. But I do think they need to bring in at least one more guy that they can trust across from Aiden Hutchinson. I have my eyes on either Jared Verse or Chop Robinson in the middle of that first round, probably trading up 8, 10, 12 spots into the first round to go get one of those guys to put alongside Aiden Hutchinson and then bring in obviously James Houston on those third down pass rush packages. I think that would severely help the Detroit Lions defensive line, but I don't necessarily think it's going to be a make or break for this season as to whether the Lions will find success or not. One position I do think they need to go pretty heavily in is going to be the cornerback position. The Lions ranked as the 27th best secondary in the NFL this year and have 4 pending free agents at the cornerback position, those being Jerry Jacobs, Kendall Vilder, Khalil Dorsey, as well as Emmanuel Mosley. The only cornerbacks currently on the roster for next year as of right now are Cam Sutton, Chase Lucas, and Stephen Gilmore. If you want to include Brian Branch as a slot cornerback, you can. I consider him still a safety / slot cornerback, but with that being the case, that leaves the Lions with 4 corners on the roster, meaning they're probably going to have to go out and get a couple. I think the Lions should re-sign Emmanuel Mosley and see what he can give you on a fully healthy year. I think they should probably go out and try to find a number 1 alpha cornerback, whether that be L'Jarius Sneed, whether that be Jalen Johnson, whether that be even potentially maybe a veteran option like Stephon Gilmore, as well as going out into the draft and finding some really good talent, because this secondary class is really good. Teron Arnold from Alabama, Kool-Aid McKinstry from Alabama, Cooper DeJean from Iowa, Nate Wiggins from Clemson, Keon Quinion Mitchell, I think is how you say it, from Toledo. You have Kamari Lassiter, you have TJ Tampa, you have Ennis Rakestraw Jr., not a big fan of Kalen King, but he's on that board. I really like Kyrie Jackson as a mid-round pick. I really like Elijah Jones from Boston College. There are a ton of really quality secondary members in this class, and I think that the Lions need to go out and get at least one rookie as well as another veteran that can include Emmanuel Mosley or be a separate player from Emmanuel Mosley. But looking at the last couple of games of the Lions season, yeah, they won. Yeah, they went, pretty good in those games, but Justin Jefferson had 141 yards the first game and 192 the second game. The week after that, CeeDee Lamb went for over 200 receiving. Puka Nacua in the wild card went for 189. Mike Evans went for 150 in the divisional round. The secondary was not good versus cornerback 1, so they need a guy that can go up against that cornerback 1. They need a guy that can match up really well versus a big alpha wide receiver and go toe-to-toe and keep them to at least an average day at best. And right now, the Lions don't have that guy. I think Arnold can do that. I think if we bring in McKinstry, he can do that. I think if we bring in DeJean or Wiggins or, Mitchell or even Lassiter, they can all do that. But I also think it might be smart to bring in a veteran like Mosley, who has done it in the past, like Snead, who was great this year, like Jalen Johnson from the Bears, who's really, really good. And I think cornerback is the second biggest position of need on this Lions roster going into the offseason. But I do think there is a bigger need. I think there's a need bigger than defensive line. I think there is a need bigger than cornerback. And a lot of people probably are going to disagree, but I think that need is actually going to be on the offensive line. Now, a lot of people are going to say, wait a minute, the Detroit Lions had arguably the best offensive line in football why would you go out and spend premium assets on the offensive line? Well, I think there is something to be said to playing to your strengths here. The Detroit Lions did have the best offensive line in football last year, and I think that was very much proven as when the Lions had a full starting healthy 5 offensive linemen. So Taylor Decker at left tackle, Jonah Jackson at left guard, Frank Ragnow at center, Graham Glasgow or Halapaloe Vaitai to start the season at the right guard position, and Penei Sewell at right tackle. The Detroit Lions were a perfect 8-0. However, with the 11 games that Jonah Jackson missed this year, however, without their starting healthy offensive line, and particularly in the 11 games that Jonah Jackson missed this year at the left guard position, the Detroit Lions went 5-6. They were still a very good football team, but you could tell when the offensive line wasn't healthy, they didn't run the ball as well. They didn't pass the ball as well. The Lions turned the football over quite a bit, and a lot of that came in that stretch from, the bad Packers game to the bad Bears game to that poor stretch which involved the Saints, and that poor stretch right in the middle from about weeks 11 to 14. The Detroit Lions offense really struggled because they had offensive line injuries along the entire line. So why not fill that out, right? If you're going to have a guy like Jonah Jackson who's going to miss 11 games a season, why keep him around if you're going to go 5-6 without him? The Detroit Lions have 3 interior offensive linemen up for contract extensions this year, that being Jonah Jackson, Graham Glasgow, and Halapaloe Vaitai. I think Vaitai is very much gone. I think he's out the door. As much as I liked Vaitai as a free agent, as much as I liked Vaitai going into the year, he's had a lot of injury concerns, and you can't re-sign a player that isn't going to be available to play. I think the same philosophy goes for Jonah Jackson. He's missed a ton of time over the last 2 seasons, and I don't think you can pay him top tier Pro Bowl guard money like he's going to be asking for a player that's going to play 8 games for you throughout a 17, 18, 19 game season. Jonah Jackson missed 11 of the 19 games the Detroit Lions played this year. He did not play in a majority of games, and that effect was very much felt by the Detroit Lions when he was not there. Now, with that being said, I think Graham Glasgow should very much be re-signed, and I think he should be giving a healthy pay raise. Was he perfect this year? No, not at all, but he was really, really good. And I think I would even rather prefer to pay Glasgow at that higher price than Jonah Jackson, because you're paying Graham Glasgow to be your starting right guard as well as to be your backup center. So you're essentially paying him for 2 positions in one to be a healthy, reliable, really, really talented, really good starter on that offensive line. But then the question becomes, if Jonah Jackson walks, if Halapaloe Vaitai is not re-signed, what do the Detroit Lions do? Well, there's a couple good options in free agency. I know that Kevin Zeitler is an offensive lineman in free agency who's on the older side, but still really good from the Baltimore Ravens. Or an idea that I continue to come back around to, and likely the thumbnail of this video is going to be Jackson Powers Johnson from the University of Oregon. He currently plays center for the Oregon Ducks. However, he has spent numerous amount of snaps playing from the tackle positions to the guard positions to the center positions. And even though he was primarily the center at Oregon this year, throughout his previous 2 years, he actually spent more time at the guard position, and he is an incredibly raw player. He is a very raw prospect, but if you can give a guy as talented as Jackson Powers Johnson to Hank Fairley in the first round, you ask him to move back outside to guard, and your offensive line goes Taylor Decker, JPJ, Frank Ragnow, Graham Glasgow, and Penei Sewell, their offensive line will be better than it was last year. And of course, obviously, the last time the Lions drafted a guy from Oregon wearing number 58 turned out to be a pretty good selection. So with that being said, I think offensive line is the biggest need going into this offseason. I think playing into your strengths, getting a quality, healthy starter alongside Graham Glasgow for the guard position is imperative for this season. And it's not just JPJ. It doesn't have to be moving the center from Oregon into the outside or kind of into that middle group. You have Graham Barton from Duke, who's a projected first-round pick. You have Troy Futanu from Washington, who's a projected early second, late first-round pick. You have a guy like Zach Zinner, who's falling due to injury, but's really, really good. You have probably 7, 8 guards projected in the top 100 who could slide in and be really good under Hank Fairley. And I would be shocked if the Lions don't address it, and potentially even address it as early as the 29th overall pick. So with that being said, that is all I have for you guys today. Those are my 3 biggest needs going into the offseason for the Detroit Lions. Defensive line, I think, is very much a need, but if it doesn't get a significant upgrade, if it doesn't get a superstar, I still think they'll be okay. I think cornerback needs a superstar. I think cornerback needs a quality cornerback one, but at the end of the day, I think the offensive line is the most important. The Lions offense is not Jared Goff. The Lions offense is not even David Montgomery or Jahmyr Gibbs or Amon-Ra St. Brown or Sam Laporta or all the weapons that they have. The Lions offense runs and goes with the health of the offensive line. When the offensive line is healthy, they are a well-oiled machine. They move people off the ball. They are elite. When the offensive line is banged up, when the offensive line isn't healthy, they're just good. They're not elite. They're not great. They're just a good, probably above average offensive line, even with the injuries, but there's a significant downgrade in play when the offensive line is not healthy. So with all that being said, I think offensive line is the biggest need. Let me know down in the comments below what you think. Who do you think is the biggest target for this offseason? What do you think is the biggest positional need for the Lions? I'd be very curious what you guys have to say. But with all of that being said, that's all I got for you guys right now. Thank you all so very much for watching. And until next time, and as always, go Lions.